This video was sponsored and approved by the Korea Agro-Fisheries and Food Trade Corporation.
Let me show you my new favorite thing. This is called makgeolli. They've been making this in Korea for a couple of thousand years. It is a rice wine, or really I think more accurately you could call it a beer. It's a little bit fizzy like beer, and it's made from grain like beer. You wouldn't normally have it in a brandy snifter, of course. You would have it in a small ceramic bowl or cup, but the brandy snifter is clear, and I'm trying to make a TV show here, you know? As you can see through the glass, it has the appearance and the kind of comforting mouthfeel of milk, and it's a little bit sweet like milk too. The bready, fermented aroma is just intoxicating. Figuratively intoxicating, only a little literally intoxicating. The alcohol percentage is maybe 5 or 6%, like a beer. And I brewed this here at home myself, which is really the only way you can taste the real thing. Unless you're in Korea or a really big Korean diaspora community, the real thing is unfiltered and unpasteurized, so it has a really short shelf life. I'm going to show you how you can brew your own makgeolli at home with this kit, and we're going to have some Korean snacks with it, and I'll tell you at the end about a drawing that you can enter to get this stuff sent to you. Seriously, the makgeolli kit and all of these snacks can be yours if you enter with the link in the description. More on that later. But first, let's talk about why you might not have heard of makgeolli. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of beer. You've probably heard of sake, which is the kind of clear, flat Japanese equivalent of this. But I'm betting for some of you, this is the first time you've ever heard of makgeolli. And why is that? Well, one reason for that might be that Korean sul, or alcohol culture, has been interrupted by several historical events. Most recently, Korea's pretty rough 20th century of foreign occupation, civil war, and ensuing reconstruction period. You could view the industry's sponsoring of this video that I'm making right now as part of the story of these brewers getting back on their feet. Another character in that story is this young fellow, Lucas Lee.
I've lived in Vietnam, I went to Hong Kong, I traveled around Europe, and then I went to Mexico for exchange. And everywhere I go, if I say I'm Korean, people know that I can drink well.
I don't doubt that you can, young sir.
And I'm currently doing a Korean traditional alcohol startup in Korea. Korean alcohol is the only alcoholic product that can be sold online in Korea by law. You can't sell outbound whiskey or other wines, but you can sell Korean alcohol.
Indeed, the regulatory state in Korea is now trying to foster the local booze industry that it has in previous times attempted to restrain, for various reasons. The first probably being religious. During the so-called Three Kingdoms period, Buddhism came to the Korean peninsula, and Buddhists famously are teetotalers. It's not the strict prohibition on alcohol that you see in, say, Islam, but Buddhists generally frown on getting intoxicated. Plus, they also just really like tea.
At that time, Goryeo Dynasty Korea also had the culture of drinking a lot of tea. But we moved on from Goryeo to Joseon Dynasty, which refused to believe Buddhism, but instead accepted Confucianism. So because the royal family was going against Buddhism, they also went against drinking tea. So people don't drink tea, then how else do you sit down and just talk with each other? It's tea or alcohol. You need to have one of those two to have this, good chit-chat.
And this is the time when we start to see a lot of people making makgeolli at home, where it's still traditionally made. It's a home brew, in part because it's just so easy to make. This right here is the brewing kit that I used. You've got rice flour in the bottle. Traditionally, you'd use whole rice grains, but the powder will brew in just a few days. That's your carbohydrate. Some yeast here to metabolize the sugars into alcohol. And here's the key ingredient. It's called nur, and it kind of looks like fish food, but it's really made from wheat and barley flour.
Because if you put water into flour, it's, very sticky, right? So you make it into a circular form and just hang it in the ground or on the air. And in the air, there are a lot of microorganisms, all different sorts of yeasts living in the air. Because it's wet and because it's flour, it has all these nutrition for the air yeast to kind of eat onto.
And one of the fungal species in the nur crucially creates the enzyme amylase, which breaks down the starches in the rice into sugars that the yeast can actually eat. Western beer making is a two-stage process where grain starches are first broken down into sugars in a phase called mashing. Then you filter out the resulting sweet liquid called a wort, and then you ferment that into beer. With makgeolli, the enzymatic conversion and the fermentation are just one continuous process. You just mix everything together and let it bubble in the corner for a few days. You gotta stir it or shake it every now and then to get the yeast into contact with fresh sugar to eat. And if you do shake it, you gotta be sure to loosen that cap before you let let it sit again, you need the air exchange.
So it's possible, especially during summer season, that this plastic bottle explode. That's why you need to change this with this black cap. If you take a closer look at this, they have some holes here. There are rooms for carbon dioxide to kind of exude away.
Now, if you don't want to deal with any of this, you can buy pre-bottled, pre-made makgeolli. This one is called Goksundang makgeolli. Doing the best I can with the Korean pronunciations. But anyway, it's delicious. It's very good.
One thing different from those regular makgeollis from Korea, from this one, it's sterilized.
Pasteurized to stop the fermentation in here before this gets shipped all over the world. Unlike something like sake, this is strained, but it's not filtered, so there's still lots of sediment in here for the yeast to eat. And they will keep fermenting as this sits on the shelf, and as a result, this isn't terribly shelf stable. It doesn't last that long if it's not pasteurized.
You're gonna feel some fizz, but that's only artificially infused.
In unpasteurized makgeolli, this fizz here is the result of active fermentation. Still, this shelf-stable bottled brand is very delicious. Lucas is a certified Korean traditional alcohol sommelier, and he recommended that I try the bottled makgeolli with these very spicy, chewy rice cakes. These Korean home meal replacement kits were also provided by the sponsor of this video. Very quick, easy, and delicious, and great with the makgeolli.
Because they're sweet and because it's gonna be ice cold when you drink it, it softens the spiciness from this tteokbokki.
Much like milk in that regard, but this is better because it's boozy milk. And Lucas highly recommends I drink this one, the homemade one, with these kimchi pizzas or pancakes. Easy to make from the kit. Kimchi, of course, the other great Korean fermented product, fermented vegetables.
It's almost a national rule for Korea to enjoy this chon or like kimchi pancake with makgeolli.
Sort of a late-night bar snack. Apparently you can buy these at Trader Joe's and other Western grocery stores here in the States.
It's like pancake and maple syrup kind of pair.
There are, of course, other kinds of sul, or traditional Korean alcohol. This one is made with snails. Or more accurately, it's made with the help of snails. It's called cheongju. I think you can more accurately call this a rice wine. It's filtered clear, it's fermented to about 14% alcohol, like fruit wines, and it even has some fruity notes to it, even though it's made with rice. Glutinous or sticky rice. It gives you a sweeter wine, and the rice used by this brewer, Yongchan, is special in another way.
Instead of using pesticides, which is, not too good for your health, apparently, they put freshwater snails in the farm. And they eat off all those bad bugs living in the rice crop. So there's no need for pesticides if you have freshwater snails in the farm.
Thank you, snails. Now, there is distilled Korean rice wine called soju, and it's distilled like any other spirit. You just make your wine, and then you boil it at the temperature at which alcohol evaporates, but water does not. You then collect that alcohol and condense it back down to a liquid, and you've got a very high alcohol drink. Instead of aging it in a wooden barrel like they might do in Europe, soju is aged in ceramic pots. This results in a very clean, smooth-tasting booze that interestingly has notes of pear. Lucas recommends pairing it with this ginseng chicken stew. Came totally made in the bag and was quite delicious, medicinal in a good way.
That sense of spiciness coming from high alcohol proof alcohol, like the sur, and that deep savory taste, they match very well.
Also the temperature contrast. Korean soup, of course, generally served boiling hot, and the soju is served ice cold. They make great chasers for each other. Some soju is diluted to lower alcohol content, some isn't. Notice that this one is not made from rice, other grains, sorghum and millet. That's how you can tell that this particular recipe originated in what you might call the dark ages of Korean alcohol, which began with the Japanese imperial occupation of the Korean peninsula in the early 20th century. What's the point of having an empire if you can't extract taxes from it, right? And for the first time, Koreans started having to pay tax on alcohol, even the stuff they brewed at home.
So at the time, a lot of people just went crazy. Why do I have to pay tax for something that I make? Right? It doesn't make sense. That home alcohol making culture died down.
But as always happens in the history of governments around the world trying to pass taxes like this, illegal bootlegging ran rampant. They tried a few things to crack down on this. They tried making households register for a license if they wanted to make their own homebrew. Then the government tried giving exclusive monopolies on the right to make alcohol to a handful of big commercial breweries. If you go to the Yangchan brewery today, you can still see the little room where a government tax officer just stood all day watching all the sales go out, making sure that each was recorded and taxed. The company that makes this soju, Moonbae-sul, was a licensed distillery in Pyongyang, the big city in what is now North Korea, and boy did the taxes flow.
So at its peak, they were very, very rich to the point where the tax they pay yearly was larger than the Pyongyang city's one-year budget.
Of course, this lovely kind of pear-tasting soju is not made in the North anymore. The Japanese Empire collapsed under the weight of American atomic bombs, and then came the bloody Korean Civil War, with the North being supported by Chinese and Soviets, and the South being supported by the Americans. And amidst all of the bloodshed and the deprivation, this family fled south.
Back then, government actually banned production of any products that require use of rice, because back then we didn't have rice to eat. How could you afford the luxury to make it into something else and waste it, right?
And that's how you end up with sul made out of different grains, like millet. Fruit wines would have also persisted through this period. This is a traditional one made out of a kind of Korean black raspberry called bokbunja. That name of the berry translates to something like upside-down jar. And just wait till you hear about why.
The name comes from a story where a guy consumed this raspberry, this bokbunja, and he got so strong with his genitals that when he urinates, the jar turned upside down because the pressure of the urine got so strong.
So yeah, anyway, they make a delightful wine out of that berry. Lucas suggested that I try it with this extremely spicy Korean instant ramen, very soothingly sweet with that. Anyway, these war-era bans on rice alcohol production persisted for a long time. Home brewing wasn't legalized until 1995. Small-scale manufacturing legalized in 2016, and in 2017 came that law allowing Korean traditional liquor to be sold online. And now you have government in Korea working with some entrepreneurs to try to bring the industry back, hence the present sponsorship on my channel. I'm happy to be involved, it's delicious stuff. Last one I'm going to show you is a true rice soju, or distilled spirit. The maker is Daejongbu. Lucas recommended I try with these little mushroom chips, oyster mushrooms cooked in a low-temperature vacuum frying method. Very crispy and tasty, good pairing. So if I've piqued your interest in sul, Korean traditional alcohol, where do you get it? Well, you can obviously get any of this stuff on Amazon, and of course you can look in any Korean market all over the world. You can also participate in something pretty fun, a virtual makgeolli making event that starts today, the day that I'm posting this video. Go to the @ATCenterLA Instagram account post that is linked in the description for instructions to enter this event. They'll select 120 folks who will get this home makgeolli brewing kit in the mail, along with all of these ready-to-eat Korean meals. Hit that Instagram link in the description, 120 people will get the makgeolli kit in the mail. Again, making it yourself is probably the only way that you're going to be able to taste the real thing, and trust me, you want to taste it. Thanks again to AT for sponsoring this video. Now forgive me, I wish to be alone with my makgeolli.